Hello and welcome to our last session of Global Perspective on citizen data and digital approaches. For the benefit of blind people and those with impaired vision, I'm a Syrian man wearing a white shirt. My name is Ayman Akkad. I'm the project manager of the Leave No One Behind Partnership, an initiative hosted by the International Civil Society Center. The Leave No One Behind Partnership is an international coalition bringing together about 100 civil society organizations and other relevant actors from global, national, and local levels. Active in 9 countries, our aim is to make sure that voices of marginalized groups heard and count in global development. But in a world driven by data, whose voices are heard and whose are left out? Isn't the digital age supposed to democratize knowledge, amplify voices, and shrink the divides among us? For millions around the world, it might be doing the opposite. The digital divide isn't just about internet connectivity or smartphone ownership. It's about who gets to be counted, whose story gets to be told, and who gets left out of the systems that shape our future. This is where citizen-generated data comes in. A grassroots effort to reclaim agency in a data-driven development. Citizen-generated data offers a powerful way to make the voices of marginalized communities heard, filling gaps left by government and institutions. However, it is without challenges. From the data quality, governance, and ownership, to making lived human experiences, or what is called qualitative data in that case, compatible with algorithms. Today's sessions ask about the questions that we all have in mind. Can citizen data and digital approaches foster trust and inclusion? To dive deeper into this topic, I would like to welcome our great panel joining us today. From Nairobi, Florence Syevuo, the Executive Director of SDGs Kenya Forum. Joseph Hassine is the AI for Social Good and grants lead for Google.org, Google's philanthropic arm, joining us from California. For Joseph, I'd like to emphasize that he is not part of Google, the tech company, but he is indeed here with us to discuss the philanthropic work of Google.org only. And last but not least, Saionara Reis, a team lead focusing on human rights and data at the Danish Institute for Human Rights and an independent state institution, joining us from Copenhagen. My colleague Ryan will be posting the bio of each speaker as they appear. Our panelists will kick us off by introducing themselves and provide their opening statements on the issue at hand for around 5 minutes each. Then this will be followed by discussions and questions as the session progresses. For the audience participation, please feel free to share your thoughts and questions in the chat. We promise to try to cover as many questions as possible. To start, I'd like to invite our speakers to introduce themselves and give us their opening statements. And I would like to start with Florence. Florence?
Thank you so much, Ayman, and really great to be here. My name is Florence Syevuo from the SDG Kenya Forum. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya, and what a great conversation to have today. In fact, when I was preparing for this meeting, one of the things I came up with was, can citizen data and digital approaches foster trust, truth, and inclusion? So the truth part, because this is where sometimes we go wrong when we speak about marginalized groups, when we speak about indigenous groups, communities, and we don't tell their truths according to who they are and what they experience. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation, and more importantly, for us to ensure that citizens are at the forefront of all decision-making processes in global spaces like this one, and also resource allocation and many others. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you very much, Ayman.
Thank you so much, Florence. Joseph, would you like to join?
Thank you very much. the benefit of the visually impaired or blind as well, my name's Joseph Hassine. I'm a white man joining in a floral shirt with the background of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, which is apt as that is where I'm generally based. So thank you for having me. I lead some of the AI and data related grants for Google.org, which is Google's philanthropic arm. I started my career in the public sector and nonprofit work before coming over to fund work that's meaningful in this space. Specifically, my role is focused on enabling nonprofits to leverage AI and advanced technology towards social good in areas like intersection of AI, food security, civic engagement, and more. And in tandem with that, I oversee Google.org's work to create a more open and accessible, equitable data ecosystem. Work on data historically has focused on two categories, either data that enables policymaking or making, or data that enables more accurate and inclusive AI tooling. And the funds that we provide cover both of those areas. So organizations that we work with might be building a new data analysis platform, creating advocacy tools to communicate with policymakers, or doing data collection in different languages or different contexts that can improve our understanding of the world and also improve the equitability of AI models. We've used generated data as a foundational part of all of these efforts because it helps to give us a more inclusive and more accurate picture of the world. Some of that kind of truth component that I really liked how Florence framed as well. And I'm excited about the work taking place in this space, led by partners like the Collaborative on Citizen Data, who we're thrilled to support as they continue to lead some of the conversation on what citizen data collection and dissemination might look like. Thank you for having me today. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for the introduction. And now with Saionara. Saionara, please come in.
Hello, everyone. I am Saionara. I'm a Brazilian woman. I'm joining with kind of a pink sweater, and I'm wearing glasses. I'm joining from Copenhagen in Denmark, where I work at the Danish Institute for Human Rights. I lead a small team that is focused on data for rights and sustainable development. So we try to work together with our partners to facilitate the data collection that they might want to have on issues that matters to them. If they are specific rights holder groups, for example, indigenous peoples or those with different rights, human rights defenders, but also in trying to untap this immense amount of information out there using an algorithm to classify data according to issues related to human rights and to sustainable development. And we also work this intersection between human rights and sustainable development to leverage the knowledge, expertise, and standards that we find in human rights and the monitoring mechanisms of human rights to promote sustainable development in countries that are focused on a human rights perspective. So that's a little bit of the work that we do. We developed some tools that facilitate data collection. We also work with partners at country level, facilitating conversations between those rights holders, communities, and organizations that are collecting data on their own issues to communicate with policymakers, with national statistical offices, and bridge a little bit the dialogue that we believe can help indeed foster trust and more understanding also of the issues related to marginalized groups. So that's a little bit of an insight into what we do at the Danish Institute for Human Rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sayonara. And I'd like to stay with you, if you don't mind, because you mentioned tools for data collections and you as I'll say like at the forefront of rights and the intersection with data and international development. How do you see the main challenges in using citizen-generated data to empower marginalized communities, while at the same time safeguarding their privacy and rights? Because this has been a global debate for a really long time, and I don't think we had an answer yet.
Yes, thank you, Ayman. This is a very big question indeed. I mean, there are so many challenges related to this. I will focus maybe on a few of them, some related to trust, also related to the ability of using that data, and discovering and understanding and using the meaning that is behind citizen data as well. So if we're talking about trust, I think one of the challenges that we're finding also as a member of the collaborative on citizen data that was mentioned by Joseph is the lack of understanding of what citizen data is meant to be. And this lack of understanding can come with a direct mistrust in that data for misunderstanding concepts such as what data quality means for those that are producing citizen data from their own communities, for example. So I think this is one core challenge that we find that needs to be addressed. It starts by opening up a conversation on what data means to any statistical office perspective, for example, what representativeness in data means for any statistical office perspective, and what it means to the communities, to the small groups where are having very qualitative conversations about their experience to access to services or to the rights that are entitled to them. So I think the trust issue is a big box that we are still to tap and to open up in a way that it becomes productive so that we can understand citizen data for the objective that it has, the purpose that it fulfills in the data ecosystem, and what it can actually inform and bring light to on issues that national data does not have the ability to, for the fact that it addresses very specialized issues, that it talks about very specific communities with specific characteristics, and can go much, much deeper in the meaning behind the data that we are collecting. So I think trust is definitely one of the challenges that I would bring to this conversation. At the same time, another challenge is on bringing this data to use. We can see, and now that we are in this collaborative, we can get in contact with a universe of communities, organizations, rights holder groups that are collecting data out there. But we still hear very little of this data being brought to the fora that can actually make an impact in their lives, which is the tables of policymakers or legislators. And this is, again, a challenge that is on one hand related to trust, to the quality of the data, but on the other hand also related to the opening of space and opportunities to have that dialogue on the very core issue of participation and engagement of citizens in the way that policies and programming are made in countries at a city level and so on. So I think having those space for dialogue can be an important door for breaking some of those challenges. And the last one that I wanted to bring up is the understanding of the meaning behind the data. We were having a very interesting conversation about measuring poverty, and measuring poverty from a statistical office perspective means going into several numbers and so on. And measuring poverty for some communities means the quality of lives that they have based on the standards that they believe is what is value for them. For example, for an indigenous community, it might mean of value and of abundance and richness to have cattle and to have sheep, but not necessarily to have a high income per se. So the understanding of poverty becomes very different. And when you're having these conversations between a statistical background and an indigenous person, you might be talking about two completely different things. But the understanding the meaning behind what citizen data means, or what those communities mean when they are collecting data, is very important to being able to address their specific needs and not the needs that society sets as the same one for everyone. So I think that's a very special aspect of citizen data that is sometimes overlooked, that it's still also a challenge to be brought into the conversation of bringing trust through citizen data. So I will stop here.
Yeah, thank you so much. That covered covered comprehensively the main aspect that I was imagining in relation to the citizen-generated data. And I would emphasize that trust has many definitions, depends on where you're standing. And again, the concept of wealth, as you elaborated, is actually varies from between me and you living in these places that we live in. And of course, thank you so much. I'll move to Joseph if you would like to come in. Again, you work with Google.org, That is not Google, the tech company. But at the same time, people look at the private sector and the private sector philanthropy from like in a different way. But from your point of view, how can private sector philanthropies like the ones you work at, google.org, better support grassroots data initiatives and ensure fair representation in data sets?
Sure, thank you. I think this will look different for every company, so I can answer based on my own perspective from google.org's philanthropy. But I think for us, the spot where it makes sense is where we can bring some unique value to the table that is useful to the ecosystem. So for example, we operate Data Commons, which is an open source platform that enables you to bring together data from across a number of sources into a single schema. So you can analyze data that a nonprofit is creating or that your organization is creating alongside census data from the National Statistical Office or data that another nonprofit has put into the system. And so that's a place where there's kind of a unique value that can be brought to the table in addition to philanthropic capital. But at the end of the day, I know that that philanthropic capital is one of the most important tools that we can bring to the table. And so I think I have a very privileged job and one that I'm grateful for, where I get to kind of be supporting these efforts with capital that we're able to offer, whether it's the collaborative on citizen data or other trust-based approaches. So for example, we talked about kind of the concept of truth and who's benefiting from these digital technologies, and is there a divide being created? I think one organization I'm excited about is called Karya, who's doing work in India specifically focused on making sure that the technology-related jobs of the future are going to hire folks from across India, from rural communities who are otherwise not necessarily benefiting from the technology boom that we're witnessing, but are rather on an end that's being damaged by that technology boom. And so organizations like Karya, who are seeking to kind of flip that, provide sustaining careers and jobs for people in those communities to participate in that wave of technological innovation. And so I think for me, to answer your question, is just looking at kind of where can we bring unique value, and where can philanthropic capital be useful in either proving that something is possible or helping to scale an idea that has already been proven successful. Grateful to do work across a number of those spaces.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that covers the majority of the question, but there remained the aspect of fairness and representation. I know that you guys do the support, probably technical support, financial support, but do you have a policy when you work with like certain initiatives or grassroots initiatives in a local context to make sure that your support is going into ensuring fair representation in your data sets?
Yeah, so I work not on the data sets that Google themselves might use, but on producing data sets useful out in the world. So I think a couple of things that we look for there are, one, just responsible use of technology and AI. So that could be as simple as ensuring that there's a human in the loop at all stages of the technology use, that at the end of the day, an algorithm is not making a decision, but making it easier for an expert in their field to make a decision. And I think that's one of the most foundational things that we can do to ensure that negative impacts are not accrued. I think another place where we operate, honestly, is reliance on external partners and peers. So I know that as a funder, I'm not going to be an expert in all of these spaces. It would be impractical for me to think that I could match the level of expertise of someone even like my fellow panelists who have been working in these spaces for quite a long time. And so we rely quite a bit on trust in the organizations that we work with and who know their communities really well. So I think a few of us have referenced the collaborative on citizen data, but that's a good example of a place that easy for a funder to come to the table, because while I may not be able to become an expert on every aspect of citizen data, I can understand that the UN Statistics Division and the partners that they've brought together are likely the right folks to be leading at least some of this effort. And so putting our support behind their work is a way to ensure that we're acting appropriately.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'll say it's the unique value that Google.org support brings, the responsible approach, let's say, to partnership and ensuring that everyone is involved in the process. And the most important, I would say, is the having a human in the loop, which is tend to be overseen. Thank you so much. And moving to Florence, I would like to pick your brain now on a more hands-on experiences from working with communities on several levels, local, on national, regional, and national levels in Kenya and beyond. What are some successful examples where citizen-generated data directly informed policies or furthered any of the SDGs progress?
Thank you so much, Ayman. And I missed out on just saying that for the sake of the visually impaired participants, I am an African woman. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya, and today I'm dressed in a striped green and white shirt, and I have my headphones on. So thank you for this question, but just maybe to put things into perspective before we dive into the question. Of course, the SDG Kenya Forum is a coalition of civil society organizations that are championing SDGs here in Kenya, SDG 1 to SDG 17. And so with us, the membership is very rich and it's voluntary, meaning that we are open to as many non-state actors who are willing, of course, to work jointly to advance all SDG implementation in terms of the SDG implementation goals, but the monitoring and review. And so back to your question on issues of citizen-generated data, Kenya and civil society in Kenya have been very quite active in this process. And for us, it's because we know this is a powerful tool that complements traditional data sources by providing real-time, but also localized and community-driven insights. And so one of the things we realized when we started our voluntary national reviews in 2017, and this is our third voluntary national review 2024, we had 2020, 2024. We realized that issues of, course, truth, inclusion, and also trust, as I said before, were not, many times being well captured within these processes. And this is because of what the National Statistical Office or the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics is able to do versus what is required or what communities and the large population needs are. And so, of course, we know a lot of NSOs are facing numerous challenges all over the world, especially in developing countries and in Africa. And so our NSO, of course, is one of those that has censuses for 10 years, a lot of outdated statistical products. And this, of course, has led to marginalization, especially groups and these community groups, the persons with disability, the older persons, the youth, all these different groups that are sort of championing their own rights out here. And so civil society organizations came in or are now coming in to fill critical gaps, particularly that underscore this kind of opportunities in remote areas. We amplify marginalized groups, fostering inclusion and participation, but also now to link that to decision-making processes. And so through the voluntary national reviews, we've been able to now, for example, in 2024, have at least 3 data sets that have been considered that are from citizen-generated data. And this one is on an indicator on education, another one is on an indicator on gender equality 5.3, and also a different indicator, I'm trying to remember the third indicator, but I'll remember it along the way. And so just seeing this kind of progress where civil society organizations have been able to sort of just invest the investment that have been done by development partners with civil society organizations. And this now the NSO coming together and bringing that within the voluntary national review, that has been very, very important. But again, within our VNR process, we are one of those countries that we use our whole of society approach and whole of government approach, meaning civil society organizations are commissioned by the national government to come up with their own voluntary national review. And so what we normally do is mobilize and bring society together with their citizen-generated data that they have. Many times it's not validated, but because this is not a process that is meaning to lock out anybody. All this data is put in the civil society report and then holistically we are able to have a civil society report that is now annexed to the national report of government. If you look at the Kenyan voluntary national reviews, you'll find that the civil society report stands there holistically, meaning citizen data that comes from all these communities, groups, is captured within the voluntary national review, and also the government can sort of utilize that for the main report and the outcomes of what we do as voluntary national reviews. And so that's one process, very intense, and also we are, of course, having challenges in terms of building capacity and ensuring that more and more civil society organizations can understand the value of the process, more groups can come up and can get involved in this. The second aspect of success story is just to backtrack, we in 2021 launched the Kenya Quality Assurance Framework, and this was a push from civil society organizations, and this came up with the guidelines for citizen-generated data, and this now gives the opportunity for civil society organizations to have guidelines that they can utilize to produce official statistics. And so this is a very, very practical aspect of civil society advocacy, and an outcome that now civil society can utilize these guidelines. In fact, right now I'm just from a workshop where we are building capacity for SDG 5 on gender equality. Members are trying to train them to understand the value of how to link their work, because of course communities are already doing so much, but now it's how to link them to what they need to be doing in terms of generation of citizen-generated data. And then the other aspect of it is through all these initiatives and through our partners, including International Civil Society Center, Paris 21, the collaboration with citizen data, Global Partnership for Sustainable Development, the Danish Institutes, ULET, Gates Foundation, and many others that we have worked with. We've now sort of just coming to jointly to ensure that as we move forward, we can prioritize more and more on the live, know, and build concept, and that's on data for marginalized groups, but also gender data. And so how do we ensure that this gender inclusion, we can showcase aspects of communities and the segregation of data in terms of gender proponents and so forth. And so this is something that is included or it's entrenched in a memorandum of understanding between the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics and the SDG Kenya Forum. And so this has given also a great initiative or pilot initiative that many countries are now looking into and wanting to see how they can also work with their local statistical office. And so, of course, just for this person, I'll wind up by saying that we do not figure out the truth aspect, which is now the trust issues, because truth means communities can speak for themselves. We can report according to what is it that communities are in need of or are going through. And that's what a lot of developing countries are going through, capturing those stories as they are and making sure that we can visualize them. When you're doing policy decision making, when we're doing budget allocation, when we are in meetings like this, how do we allocate funding towards these very great priorities? And so, yeah, thanks, Ayman, and I can come back later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Florence. I've seen in the comments that some have issue with the voice coming from your end, probably. But yeah, thank you. That covered the technical aspect of what it means to work on the ground with several stakeholders to ensure that there is the visibility that we wish for marginalized communities, not only through numbers and quantitative data, but also through sharing the lived experiences. But this takes me to the next question, which I think has to do with citizen data and institutional kind of systems. When citizen-generated data brings a grassroots perspective and provides insights into lived experiences, or again, as we call it, the qualitative data, they are not usually captured by numbers and quantitative indicators. What does it take to ensure that citizen-generated data is taken seriously and constructively by policymakers and institutions? I'd like to pose this question to Saionara because I think you have that insight, but anyone from our panelists is free to jump in and contribute to that question.
Thanks, Ayman. Yeah, I mean, I think I alluded to some of that while talking about the challenges and the needs for creating that space for dialogue. I do think that we need to build alliances. We have seen we have been working with citizen data, particularly with indigenous peoples, as a partner for more than 10 years now. And we have seen the change that we have felt when working at country levels in the past couple of years, since this collaborative on citizen data has been established and started the efforts to develop a framework on citizen data, which is trying to bring a common language, but also trying to bring to the table, to the conversation, those actors that can be crucial in bringing this data to use at national level. So I think those alliances that we are seeing right now are strengthening all the voices that were before speaking separately and now are coming together, having a platform where they can amplify by coming by uniting their efforts. Also by having those difficult conversations for the first time, because the issue of lack of trust and data quality and meaning of data, it has always been out there, but we never really had a platform to then address it and think of the way forward. Of course, we cannot say that all citizen data is perfect data, is good quality data. Of course, this would be really difficult to affirm. But certainly there is a lot of meaningful information in the citizen data out there that was deserving of this platform to be able to be brought to use. So I think one of the ways forward really is to try to unlock the box of secrets that were then kept by those individuals that either produced or had mistrust towards the data. And this is what is happening right now. We are having these expert group meetings where we come together with national statistical offices, civil society organizations, groups of rights holders, the United Nations, other state institutions, national human rights institutions, and having those tough topics that not always we manage to get through immediately, but that allows us to think about, okay, we found a stumbling block to be able to use this data. What is the way forward? Do we need to partner? Maybe the statistical office could provide some trainings to the civil society organizations so that they can maybe implement different methodologies, more sound methodologies in the future that will allow for the data to have a better trust and therefore better use by those that can impact their lives. So this is definitely one of them, those alliances, both at international level, because we are then creating a common language and framework, but also and mostly at national level to then try to move on those stumbling blocks more concretely. And I think also another important point that we can have here is bringing the issue of technology to the table. We are now in the institute, we have developed this, it's a small algorithm that we have mostly for our own use that can help classify text. We are wondering if there is, the diversity of citizen data out there with a lot of qualitative information. Could we use this algorithm or another types of technology to help bring meaning to that data that will help us maybe see more easily at hand what is the information that it's relevant for in a specific issue that you are looking for in a specific right. If you want to look into issues related to the right to health, what is the qualitative data, the citizen data out there that we have? Can this be meaningful for us to then try to understand a bit better what are the issues of most importance for communities? Can that help us also compare maybe with the issues that are faced by other countries or communities? So I would say maybe technology also throwing in the second point that can help us move forward with this question.
Yeah, thank you, Sayonara. I wonder if Joseph wants to add, because I have the next question for you ready, Joseph.
Would just jump in to say that I agree. I think something that came to mind while you were speaking, Sayonara, is just the need for not only organizations that know their communities intimately and are able to collect this data and produce it reliably, but also organizations that are able to bring that into action and have the skill of communication and advocacy and are able to kind of amplify the work. Because I think something we often hear said in these spaces is if the data is created but nobody looks at it, kind of what's the point or what was the impact? And I think that philanthropy for a long time, honestly, has funded a lot of kind of pockets of creation of tools, of data sets, but not always funded kind of the follow-up of what are we able to do with this? How is it getting into the hands of who needs it? And I think I agree, Saionara, that technology can be a tool there. But I also know technology is not kind of the tool or the only thing that we should be relying on to make sure the data reaches the right folks and is used.
Yeah, thank you. And just speaking of advocacy, I think that's a nice segue into the power dynamics in that context. And I would like if you stay with me for this. So this question is about the power dynamics and citizen data and like the approach to citizen data. Because when we talk about it, we think of citizen-generated data as a tool to empower communities, and specifically those of marginalized communities or historically marginalized groups. But its collection and use are often dependent on external funding or partnerships, right? You mentioned the collaborative, which involves so many actors, including the UNSD, including the Leave No One Behind Partnership and others. And full disclosure, the collaborative is potentially receiving funds through the google.org for the citizen-generated data approach and the Copenhagen framework. But my question is, how do we ensure that power stays in the hands of the communities or those contributing the data?
I think it's a great question. I think there's two answers that I come to from the philanthropy side. I think one is as a funder, and I can only speak for my organization, not for all funders, but as a funder, only exerting influence to the extent that it's maintaining those core principles. So when we fund a partner, I'm not coming in with a Google perspective on kind of what the work should look like. I'm trusting them to understand the work that they're doing and be able to build that, and making sure that power is not seated too heavily with the funding organization, which I think it often is in many of these contexts. I think the places where I can leverage my influence is, for example, we have funded an organization for a long time called the Lacuna Fund that works to build data sets in contexts where they don't currently exist so that they can be used for AI tooling. So for example, there might be a language that is low resourced and cannot train an AI model. And because of that, a healthcare tool that's been created setting may not be accessible to folks who only speak that language. And so Lacuna Fund creates data sets that fill that gap. But something that we influence is ensuring that folks who are contributing their data are, one, being paid for the data, and two, have full control over the data that they're providing. And so I think those are spaces where, from my seat, I can influence that power dynamic by ensuring that the implementing organization is following those same principles, and that they're not collecting data in an extractive way or in a way that goes against the community's principles that they're navigating.
It's very interesting that you mentioned there's a full control aspect to the data collection or data contribution. What does it mean in practice? If you can give me an example, please.
Yeah, happy to. So one organization, this is not an effort that I'm directly supporting, but that I'm familiar with, is there's an organization in the US called Indigenius that works with indigenous communities across the Americas. And they're trying to preserve indigenous language. So there's hundreds of languages that are expected to go extinct in the next 5 to 20 years as the last native speakers pass away. And so this indigenous-led organization is seeking to collect that data so that those languages are preserved, and they can use that data to build curriculum to teach youth in those indigenous communities their native language. But indigenous language is a very precious thing. It's held very close in many tribal communities. And so putting that data out into the ecosystem without an understanding of how it's going to be used is not something that these communities do, or something that they should do, or that anyone should ask them to do. But this organization in Genius is basically setting up kind of the charter, what is the data ownership and making sure that that is held within the tribes, so that an individual tech company or nonprofit is not extracting their data and using it in ways they might not have hoped for or intended. So I think really those kind of intermediary nonprofits who can represent the communities that they support and building that kind of framework for, okay, if you're going to interact with our communities, this is what we expect of you in terms of data usage. Things like ensuring that if that language data is used down the line for a for-profit purpose, there's payment going to communities that provided the language data and things of that sort. So I know a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think one example that's fresh in my mind of some organizations doing really cool work in this space.
Yeah, thank you. It's always good to have an example. It's a show, note, don't tell approach. But thank you. I don't know if Sayonara or Florence would like to contribute to the discussion here.
Ayman, confirm if you can hear me much better.
Clearly, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, and sorry for the technical glitch. So I just wanted to recap a little bit, and then I can also chip into that conversation. For the sake of those that maybe asked, you had asked me about some of the success stories here. And so I talked about three major things. And so the first one was about the voluntary national reviews, 2017, 2020, and 2024, how we've been involved in this process, ensuring that marginalized groups and communities, persons with disability, elderly persons, women groups that are marginalized, indigenous groups, and many others can sort of be part and parcel of the voluntary national review processes. And this, of course, is from a data perspective, ensuring that they can tell their stories real time and also engage within the process. And so within the voluntary national reviews for Kenya, 2027, 2020, and 2024, you'll find the civil society report that a lot of it is qualitative data, and so gives perceptions of communities, their needs, their advocacy points, and what they strongly believe in. And this for us has been a great success story. Of course, like many other developing countries, we are still building capacity for communities and for civil society organizations to sort of come on board and to understand the voluntary national review process and what it means for them. There's a lot of value addition, them sort of talking about their real life situation stories and linking that to policy making, budget processes, and of course investment outcomes that come from country level, linking that to the regional and the global spaces. And so the VNR story is a powerful one, and of course there needs to be continuous capacity building opportunities for civil society entities, and also bringing them together with other stakeholders for peer-to-peer and cross-learning. The second one was about the Kenya Quality Assurance Framework that was developed by the NSO, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. And with that, it has the citizen-generated data guidelines that the SDG Kenya Forum and partners like Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, GIZ, Paris 21, Foundation, the Gates Foundation, ULET, International Civil Society Center, and many others have collaborated with the Kenyan civil society organizations to ensure that we could have these guidelines to provide civil society an opportunity to provide official statistics and investments. And so this is something that now we are in the implementation phase, and of course require a lot of resources channeled towards us seeing persons with disability coming up with some of their own data sets that could enrich conversations around who they are and what they want, and what needs to be done. And again, ensuring that also we don't leave out people in the decision-making processes. And this again has gotten us to an MOU that brings the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics and the forum, SDG Kenya Forum, to implement and focus on citizen-generated data and issues of gender statistics. And so that was the summary initially for those that had missed on that. But again, to speak about this conversation is to ensure that we need to ensure that citizen-generated data is accessible first and foremost. because even when produced, we still have a lot of, for example, persons with disability who are not able to access some of the formats, how this data is produced and how, how it's presented. So then how do we ensure that we can promote open data frameworks that speak to specific groups? How do we, of course, bridge the digital divide? And the colleague from Google has spoken a lot about this. A lot of countries like Kenya are using, like just very interesting innovation and technology. The mobile phone is a big, tool that can or is being used by communities. How then can we capitalize to ensure that communities can use that which they have access to? And also user-friendly platforms, visualized data that is required for communities to be able to understand the problem, or one of the biggest challenges is how we produce data sets and statistics, very huge outcome documents that a lot of communities, even just people who are educated, are not able to read 300-page reports, or even 50-page reports. How then do we simplify this data? How do we ensure that we can get out the message in a very simplified format and a very spot-on kind of approach? And then, of course, the second one after accessibility is the issue of use, ethical use. Again, we have to we have to ensure that we are covering issues of privacy protection, especially when you're dealing with marginalized groups. How do we ensure that we're following all the data protection laws? The consent is a big one. Many times, a lot of statistics and data do not allow citizens or communities to consent. And then how do we also ensure secure storage of personal data in a continent where personal data many times is abused? Again, also the AI ethics and issues of, mitigation. How do we, AI is a big conversation. Different countries are having a huge uptake and also positioning themselves. But then how do we, of course, for example, build tools and platforms that young people, populations like for the young people can take advantage of different marginalized groups? How do we produce or provide these opportunities for them? And then also the issue of sustainability. Again, this is a big one coming from the civil society. Many at the times, a lot of funders or investors are, just investing in a one-time kind of approach, a project that comes to an end, and that leaves out a lot of communities or a lot of innovations, initiatives hanging. And so how do we ensure the sustainability, the long-term data governance conversation? How do we minimize issues of environmental impact? How do we ensure that we can empower local ownership? That when we start off these initiatives that look at issues of trust, inclusion, how can we ensure that communities do that? So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I got up with your point on trust. I'll call it trust in data ecosystems, and like how data contributors can trust where their data is being used, storage, or interpreted, let's say. So I'll pose this question to the three of you, our panelists for today. Is that some would argue that the trust in the traditional government data is waning. But does philanthropy have a role in building trust between marginalized communities and institutional systems? And if so, how do we foster trust without alienating anyone, without repeating the historical mistakes that have taken place during our progress as humanity? Any would like to step in, please feel free to do so.
So Ayman, maybe I could continue just to say that, of course, the trust bit is quite central and important. And that's why we need to ensure that, one, we can scale the impact in terms of what is working in all this. When we do investments or when we come to local communities, there's already some indication of something that could be working. So mapping that out and investing along those lines. And so the scaling up builds trust and also builds inclusion and opportunities for communities to have the local ownership of these processes. And so it has to be people-driven in terms of what the priorities are and how we do the investments. And so this, for me, is one of the major things when it comes to how to build trust in terms of community citizen-generated data and how this is done. Again, we have to go back to communities. There needs to be a feedback mechanism whereby even after involving communities, a lot of communities have complained. Of course, a lot of communities have the fatigue of feeling that people come in, get the data out or whatever information out and never come back to disseminate the results. So then how can we ensure that there's a feedback mechanism and that is simplified, not just saying you can go to our website and find the reports, that's not feedback mechanism, yeah.
Thank you so much. I wonder if anyone would like to step in before we move into the last question. Please,
I
Joseph.
think just one point that I would echo from partners in the ecosystem is that while sometimes the goal of citizen data is to incorporate with official statistical offices and sources, sometimes the goal is not. And actually, it's okay if the organization that is leading the citizen data effort does not integrate directly with the government body in some cases, if the government is not in alignment with that community needs. And so I would just say, holding space for that as well, where every citizen data effort does not need to be intended to intersect directly with the official sources, but can rather be a community view that's outside of a official source that might be antagonistic to that community.
And if I may also add as well on this question, in agreement with both Joseph and Florence on everything they mentioned, I think there is also an important role for the philanthropic sector, which is coming into this moment in life where organizations at global level and at local and national level are both coming to a consensus around the fact that we need more flexibility in the way that grants are made nowadays, and the impositions that grants have especially when those grants are directly delivered to global or international organizations, to provide as much as possible for the flexibility and allowance for those funds to be disbursed and used by the local organizations. And that really requires a shift in the way we are geared towards our grant making, our report making, and the trust also that there is, and the requirements that there are for local organizations to be able to be part of those grants as direct receivers of those grants. So I think there is also this very important point in joining into this mind shift from the philanthropic sector to make sure that this change can be allowed and those at the local level can have really the agency also financially on the priorities, on the deliveries and use of the grants that are invested into data projects.
Yes, absolutely. I sense the agreement among our panelists, which I didn't think that we're going to have. I thought we're going to have more of a debate and disagreements, but I'm glad that we're aligned on the priorities and values and principles to guide that. But given that we have 4 minutes, I would allow each speaker to give me 1 minute on the future of citizen-generated data. What does success look like? Does it look like a widespread adoption by government and institutions? Or is it empowering communities to shape their own future, even if the data remains outside of the systems? I'll start with Saionara.
Thanks, Ayman. I think they are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, I think the empowerment and agency of citizens should definitely be the priority there and remain the center and the focus of what citizen data is and the purpose it has. There is one of the principles that it's used a lot by indigenous communities, which are called the care principles. One of them is the collective benefit. And I do believe that citizen data is here to prove that data can serve that purpose. So I definitely think the empowerment and agency of citizens certainly a priority. But at the same time, the impact that we will see from what the citizens are meaning to say and transmit with the data that they are collecting in many times depends on the uptake of that data. So certainly that would be accompanied by them. So I would say not exclusive, but rather complementary objectives there for the future of citizen data. Thank you very much for this.
Great point. Thank you. Florence, would you like to come in also for a minute, please?
Yeah, so of course, I agree with Saionara. It has to be a collaborative that runs concurrently, prioritizing citizen engagement and ways of investments, but also the NSOs need to be strengthened for them to give maximum impact and to work together with not just civil society, but other stakeholders. Thank you.
That was a great and to the point answer. Joseph, please come in.
I would agree with my prior panelists. Apologies, Ayman, for all of the agreement. I think the only thing I would emphasize is that the effort underway right now to align on standards for quality and validity of citizen data, in my opinion, is core to the future of citizen data and ensuring that there's some stamp of validity and accuracy that can be placed on these sources so that they're able to be used. And I would just remind us to continue to focus on use and application. So avoiding creating more dashboards and reports unless there's a plan for getting those into the hands of someone who can do something with them.
Yes, absolutely. A very valid point, knowing how much knowledge there is somewhere on the cloud that's never been used. Thank you so much. Thank you, Joseph, joining us from California. Thank you, Florence, joining us from Nairobi. And thank you, Sayonara, joining us from Copenhagen. It was a great conversation on citizen data and actually the future of citizen data, as well as the digital approaches. Me personally, I learned a lot. I hope everyone joined us today have learned and had the space to reflect on the use and the future of citizen-generated data. I would have hoped for more questions from the participants, but I think the substance that we shared is more than enough to answer everyone's questions. That would be it for Global Perspective for this year, 2024. Thank you so much for being with us throughout the day, and looking forward to meeting you next year. Thanks to our panelists individually and collectively for sharing their experiences and ambitions actually for the citizen-generated data. And we'll meet you soon. Thank you and have a good day.